Hey guys, welcome to That Florida Feeling. How are you guys this week? I hope everybody's doing good. Today, the first thing I want to do is give a shout out to another podcast. I want to give a shout out to Florida Men on Florida Man. They are an amazing group of people who have a really awesome podcast about Florida. In fact, they're one of the people who have helped me the most when I started this podcast. They encouraged me, they gave me tips, and I just want to be able to say thank you to them and give back. So, here in a second, you're going to hear their promo because I want you guys to know about them. I want you guys to listen to them. I want you guys to love them as much as I do.
If you like small town mystery, crazy news, and wild history, then the Florida Men on Florida Man podcast is for you. Each week, Josh Mills and Wayne McCarty bring you the absolute best Florida has to offer. So if you're looking for a show that's safe for the family, but funny enough to help you escape everyday life, then listen to the Florida Men on Florida Man podcast. That's Florida Men, plural, on Florida Man podcast.
Hey guys, just wanted to give another shout out to Florida Men on Florida Man. They're awesome. Hope you guys like their promo and you're going to check them out. They're on Spotify. I really can't thank them enough for all the encouragement. So I hope that you guys like them as much as I do. I also want to say thank you to everybody who's interacted with the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok pages. Always awesome. Thank you. I really can't thank you guys enough for helping this podcast become successful. I could not do it without you guys. Also, thank you for those of you who participated on the Wednesday polls and questions. I love learning about you all. I think the two best answers I got this week, that what's your favorite thing to cook, were meth, because that's just like the most Florida answer ever, and then the books, because that's the second most Florida answer ever. Shout out to Old Gangster Florida. So, I've had a lot of people request history topics for the podcast, and so today I want to talk to you about some of Florida's history. We're not going to go quite as far back as we did a couple weeks ago. But I want to talk to you about a person who is basically the reason that Florida exists in the way it does today. And they were so influential that they literally have something named after them in every town. And I'm talking about Henry Flagler, the man who brought the snowbirds, brought the railroads, saved St Augustine, founded Palm Beach, and made the Keys accessible. So let's talk about him. I kind of call him the second founder of Florida. I mean, I've talked to him about him in other episodes, especially the St. Augustine and the Keys episodes, but never actually told you about him. So today, let's talk about Henry Morrison Flagler, who is the man that built Florida. Henry Morrison Flagler was born on January 2nd in 1830 in Hopewell, New York. Not a native, but close enough. He had a pretty normal upbringing. He wasn't really wealthy or poor. He was kind of just middle class. But he went to school through the 8th grade before he moved from New York to Ohio. And he went to work with his family, his uncle and his half-brother. And while he did so, he learned a lot about business. And he actually moved pretty quickly through the local store that they owned. He ended up running it, and then he eventually started his own thing. He started Flagler and York Salt Company with his brother-in-law, Barney York, in 1862. And they had a salt mining business in Saginaw, Michigan. And, of course, 1862 is the middle of the Civil War, and the company eventually collapsed, partially due to them not possessing the technical knowledge and thanks to the Civil War. But he stated that in this failure, he learned a very valuable lesson. He lost $100,000 and was stated as saying, only invest in a business after a thorough investigation. I would actually say that's really sound advice, even in today's times. He didn't give up, though. He re-entered the grain business with his uncle and worked to pay back the money he had borrowed from his failed salt business. He worked, and he actually eventually began to make friends with some of the most influential people of the day, such as John D. Rockefeller. And that friendship alone would pay off so much. The friendship paid off as Rockefeller started his own oil company and approached Flagler to be a partner in the new company. The partnership of Rockefeller, Andrews, and Flagler would eventually become Standard Oil, one of the major companies in the U.S. And the company grew as the industry took off, and they actually eventually gained pretty much complete control of the oil refining in the U.S., partially because they had been buying out other smaller or failing companies. They also had control of the kerosene industry as well. So you're talking about some very business-savvy, wealthy people. Now, Flagler was still in Ohio at this time. He actually stayed in Ohio until his first wife, Mary, fell ill. And a physician actually recommended them to travel to Jacksonville to escape the brutal winters of Ohio. So they traveled down there and they fell in love with it. And they stayed for a little bit. And of course, unfortunately, Mary didn't improve and actually passed away in 1881. And he mourned her before remarrying Ida Alice. Ida Alice was also the same person who was the caretaker for Mary. You'll learn a little bit later that Flagler wasn't the most upstanding man, so we're not really sure how long he had been talking to Ida. And of course, they got married and they traveled to St. Augustine. Flagler found St. Augustine to be a charming town, but he saw that it lacked hotels, amenities, and transportation. The Villa Zoyata had just been built by Franklin Smith, and Flagler wanted to buy it for his honeymoon. Smith loved his house and refused to sell, but in that moment, it planted an idea in Flagler's head for the future makings of St. Augustine. He wanted to make St. Augustine into something. He wanted it to be a town that not only he wanted to come to, but that other people wanted to come to. So he kept that in the back of his head. Flagler eventually gave up his day-to-day involvement in Standard Oil. He did remain on the board, as he still had a control in it, but he had set his sights elsewhere. He wanted to do something else. He went back to St. Augustine in 1885, and he made Smith an investment offer. He told Smith that if he could raise $50,000, then he would invest the rest of $150,000 to build a hotel together. Smith took him up on the offer, but unfortunately he wasn't able to come up with those funds. But that didn't stop Flagler. He was going to build his hotel. And not only was he going to build a hotel, he was going to build a 540-room hotel that was known as the Ponce de Leon Hotel. Now, in building this, he actually spent well over the original $150,000. Smith actually did stay involved. He did help train the masons to build the hotel in the same manner as the Zoyata, which was kind of a poured concrete, which was new to the time. Now, of course, the hotel also had other helpers and people who invested, and it was helped along by Dr. Anderson, who was actually a native of St. Augustine. He actually helped Flagler work on it, and together, they actually opened the hotel in 1888. The hotel was an instant success. If you're wondering what that hotel is today, that hotel is now Flagler University, or Flagler College. And you can still see part of the Ponce de Leon Hotel when you walk into the college. It's actually where you walk in to take the tours, and it leads up to the dining room. And the original woodwork, the marble, the frescoes, they're all there. And if you ever get the chance to go to St. Augustine, take that tour. It is a beautiful, beautiful building filled with lots of history and a couple ghosts. Personal experience on that one. Now, Flagler continued to enjoy St. Augustine, but he knew that he needed to build a better transportation system to support people coming not only to the hotel, but to the city. So he got into the railroad business. That was naturally the next step. He actually purchased a short line railroad in what eventually would become the Florida East Coast Railroad. In one of his weird business practices, he actually used convict leasing, which is pretty much what you think it was. He basically used convicts to build the railroad, or the chain gang. And he did this to modernize the railroads to accommodate heavier loads and more traffic, as he knew that the railroads were going to be bustling with people wanting to come to Florida. And he wasn't wrong. Now, the railroad and the hotel project created a huge interest in the area, and Flagler kind of wanted to create the new American Riviera. He wanted people to come and to stay and to enjoy. And he decided to expand his hotel holdings after he had built the railroad across the St. Johns River, and he wanted to access the southern part of the state. So he purchased Hotel Ormond, just north of Daytona. He also built the Alcazar Hotel as an overflow from the Ponce de Leon Hotel. The Alcazar Hotel you can still see part of it today. He also built the Casa Monica Hotel. He bought it from Smith, who had built the Villa Zoria. He bought that from him. He also made his personal residence in Florida as he built Kirkside in St. Augustine. So he basically took over the city, kind of saved the city at that point. Side note, you can still visit the Casa Monica Hotel. It sits catty corner from Flagler College. And of course, as Flagler continued to build the railroad through Florida, he built hotels along the way because people have to have a place to stay, right? And he had already done so well, he just continued. He actually built an 1,100-room Royal Poinciana Hotel on the shores of Lake Worth in Palm Beach. And he brought the railroad to West Palm Beach by 1894. Fast mover. And when he did so, he essentially founded Palm Beach and kind of West Palm Beach. The Royal Poinciana Hotel was the largest wooden structure in the world at the time he built it. He also constructed the Palm Beach Inn that overlooked the Atlantic. He had originally intended for West Palm Beach just to be a stop on the railroad, but after the freezes hit Florida in 1894 and 1895, he reconsidered. He noticed that during those freezes, just 60 miles south was unharmed from the cold weather, so he knew where he wanted to go next. He wanted to go to Miami. So far, he has made his money in oil, started having a hotel tycoon, built the railroad south, created a couple cities along the way, and now he has his sights set on Miami. Flagler actually helped to incorporate Miami after getting land grants from settlers in the unincorporated areas. And when he was down there, he didn't just buy up their land, he actually encouraged them to do agriculture. He encouraged fruit farming. So new settlements along the Miami River were there so that people would be along his railroad line so that he would have food and supplies. So not only did he set up his railroad, he set up places for people along the railroad, which is actually genius. And he actually helped this idea by making generous gifts to hospitals, schools, and churches in the area. And in 1896, that was the year that the railroad reached Biscayne Bay, and he would continue to help Miami grow. He actually saw that it needed more infrastructure, so he started by dredging the canals. And then he built that infrastructure. He also created the first water and power systems, and he even created the Metropolis, the first newspaper in Miami. So now he's created cities, saved St. Augustine, and pretty much reestablished Miami. Miami was incorporated in 1896 and they actually wanted to name it Flagler in honor of the man who basically built the town. He declined. He did not want it to be named after him. I bet he'd be pretty upset to know that now there's a county and a beach named after him. But he did decline. He wanted them to name it Miami, spelled like the month May and then A-M-I, Miami. And he wanted to do that to honor the people who used to live in the area. He understood that history was important and he wanted to hold on to it. So they did. They named it Miami. And then they knew that they still wanted to honor him, so they created an artificial island in Biscayne Bay, and they called it the Flagler Monument Island in his honor. Now, you may think this man's basically established Miami and put the railroad all the way through, but he's got to be done, right? Well, he wasn't, and he especially wasn't done with Miami. He ended up opening the exclusive Royal Palm Inn in 1897, where it actually overlooked Biscayne Bay. And I will say that this inn was built on a Tequesta burial mound. So, that right there kind of tells you something. They actually unearthed 50 to 60 skulls in the building of this property. They put the remains in barrels and in sinkholes. They also removed evidence of a Spanish mission and a slave plantation from decades earlier. Remember all that. This was in 1897. The inn only lasted until 1930, so 30-something years. And that was after it had been infested by termites, severely damaged in a 1926 hurricane, had other interesting incidents happen. So all I'm going to say is, maybe they should have treated the dead better, and maybe it would have lasted longer. So Flagler was still making Florida do its thing and creating things and making it better. But he was also dealing with personal things at this time. His second wife, Ida, was declared insane by Flagler's friend, Dr. Anderson. Remember the guy in St. Augustine? Yeah, that Dr. Anderson. And he had her institutionalized in 1897. Okay, my question about that is, was she really insane or did he just want rid of her? Because back then, a woman having PMS was enough to have her institutionalized. A woman telling you no was enough to have her institutionalized. So, I think more of like he just wanted rid of her. Because At the same time, he was beginning to have an affair with Mary Lily Keenan, starting sometime in 1899. The newspapers even caught wind of this and began to report on their activities. So they weren't hiding it. Like, they weren't hiding the fact that they were seeing each other. You kind of have to wonder when that started. I mean, you know, she was institutionalized only a couple years earlier. Had it been going on before that? So, what did Flagler do? He didn't like it. He knew that if Ida was institutionalized, he wasn't divorced, right? He was still legally married to her. So, using his wealth, money, and power, he bribed the Florida legislature to make insanity grounds for divorce in 1901. And wouldn't you know, he remarried in 1901. Fun fact, though, Flagler is also the only person to use this as a reason for his divorce before the law was repealed only 4 years later in 1905. So he married Mary and moved to Whitehall in in Palm Beach. Now, Flagler was still working growing on Florida, and he decided in 1905 that he needed to continue to extend his railroad. He was setting his sights on Key West. And of course, Key West at the time was actually Florida's most populous city, with 20,000 people calling it home. Key West was also the U.S.'s only deep water port closest to the Panama Canal. So he knew that he could take an additional advantage of the trade route with Cuba and Latin America, because he knew that the canal would help in the trading business. So he had many reasons for wanting to expand to Key West. He worked and he built the Florida Overseas Railroad in 1912, and he connected the rest of the world to Key West. Now, Flagler was once asked about his I cannot say this word for some reason. Philanthropic, oh my lord. His good efforts in Florida. And he said, "I believe the state is the easiest place for many men to gain a living. I do not believe that anyone else would have developed it if I do not, but I do hope to live long enough to prove I am a good businessman by getting a dividend on my interest." So basically, he took it upon himself to create Florida and to help others live in Florida, which is really cool. And he did create much of the east coast of Florida with his investments, the railroads, the hotels, setting up hospitals, libraries, creating a living for so many people. But like I said, he wasn't the greatest person, and he didn't do it without controversy. Flagler was a fan of convict labor, like I said, for his railroads, and they were released from Florida prison camps. Most of those people were actually African Americans. He did this to clear the land for the Royal Palm Hotel in Miami and to build much of his railroad from West Palm Beach to Miami and further into Key West. He also used immigrants. Immigrants were given harsh working and living conditions, and many of them were actually victims of debt slavery, which basically means that it's a form of slavery because you have to pay off a debt. He wasn't a nice man to the people who worked for him. He also had employees who were tried on these charges, especially the ones who were using the immigrants, but they were overturned. And Flagler actually fought to show people that he provided health care and was a good employer despite what the press and people said about him. I mean, I can't believe that he did everything on goodwill. I can't believe that he didn't want to use the cheapest amount to get the most done in the shortest amount of time. So I kind of believe the controversy. I believe that he wasn't the greatest person. And I'll tell you a story why in a minute. Now, in March of 1913, unfortunately, Flagler fell down a flight of marble stairs in Whitehall, and he never recovered from these injuries. He actually passed away 2 months later on May 20th in 1913 at 83 years old. The funeral was held on May 23rd, 1913, and at 3 p.m. on that day, all engines in the Florida East Coast Railroad were stopped for 10 minutes to pay tribute, and people waited all night to see the funeral train as it passed from Palm Beach to St. Augustine. Flagler is entombed at the Flagler Family Mausoleum in the Memorial Presbyterian Church in St. Augustine, along with his first wife, Mary, his daughter, Jenny Louise, and granddaughter, Marjorie. Flagler had one surviving son, Henry Harkness Flagler, from his first wife. Now, you can see where Flagler is entombed. It's the Memorial Presbyterian Church in St. Augustine. It's probably one of the most photographed churches in St. Augustine, if not in Florida. I've posted pictures of it. I'll post another one so you can see it. Flagler's actual funeral was held there, and he's got a legacy in St. Augustine. He's actually got a haunting legacy in St. Augustine. They say that he still haunts the Ponce de Leon Hotel. They say that you can hear him moving about throughout the hours of the night sometimes. They do say on the day of his funeral, the doors flung open at the moment that they were done with his eulogy. So he did have a huge impact on St. Augustine, and it's not to say that maybe he didn't stick around. It's a beautiful building that he put his heart and soul into, and he rests right nearby, so I'm not surprised if Henry Flagler doesn't still walk around. Now, that is on Flagler College campus, and let me tell you a story about Dr. Anderson. Dr. Anderson's house still sits on Flagler College, and Dr. Anderson eventually sold his house to Flagler, or somehow it was given or bought it, and they say, the rumor is that Flagler used to take his mistresses over to Dr. Anderson's house while his wife was staying in the hotel. That's actually a well-known rumor in St. Augustine. I don't know, obviously, if it's true or not, but it definitely adds to the credence of how interesting Mr. Flagler could have been. Now, it's not to say that Flagler didn't leave a lasting legacy on Florida. He helped to bring the industry into the state, bring people into the state, built infrastructure that is still in use to this day. In fact, he connected Florida to the Keys, which who knows how long that would have taken if he hadn't done it himself. A lot of the buildings he built in St. Augustine are still used to this day. A lot of Florida really does owe him a debt of gratitude because he either built it or founded it. Miami has a street and an island named after him. There's Flagler College and Flagler Hospital in St. Augustine. Flagler County and Flagler Beach are all in his honor. You can actually still visit Whitehall that stands and is now a Henry Flagler Museum. Ponce de Leon Hotel in St. Augustine is Flagler College. You can take a tour of it and see the amazing work. The Alcazar is now the Leitner Museum, which is actually directly across the street from the hotel. And the Casa Monaco still stands as one of the oldest hotels in the U.S. that he did own and upgrade. Many cities in Florida do have a Flagler Street named after the person who basically helped put Florida on the map. I have gotten to explore a lot of the buildings in St. Augustine, and let me tell you that Flagler did not hold back on creating an absolutely beautiful experience for his guest. I told you a little bit about the Ponce de Leon Hotel in my St. Augustine episodes, which is now Flagler College. But I will tell you that it uses the old restaurant for the dining hall for the students. And if you ever want to see the opulence of old Florida that Henry Flagler spared no expense, then do take that tour. The stairs are marble. There are stained glass windows that are Tiffany. They're gorgeous. The decor is still beautiful. It still has gold. It still has mahogany. The ceilings are still full of frescoes. And he spared absolutely no expense in creating this absolutely beautiful experience. The tables are still pretty much the same, and the dining hall chairs, there are actually still a couple of the original 1900 ones. You can tell the difference because the original ones had little wheels on them, and the new ones do not. Henry Flagler, with all of his downfalls, is still the reason that St. Augustine survived, that Palm Beach even exists, that Miami is the powerhouse of a town it is today, and that we can just take a short trip to the Keys. We have to thank him for a lot. I mean, maybe not the snowbirds, but quite a bit. And you can explore much of what Flagler built and created that helps make Florida today. You can enjoy learning history of the state, seeing new sights. But as you're doing this and as you're learning about Flagler, please, please, please avoid Florida Man. Y'all, he's out there and he's real. Today's Florida Man actually comes to us from Lake County, Florida. Florida Man was arrested after hitting his wife with a Christmas tree because she wanted him to help make dinner. Dude, it's just dinner. Calm down. Uber Eat that crap or DoorDash. It's not worth a Christmas tree. Or an assault charge. Alright guys, I hope that everyone has had a good start to February. I hope that you have enjoyed your friends and family. I hope that whatever you do decides to bring you fun. Thank you for listening. Please don't be the next Florida Man. I really don't want that for anybody. If you have a second, I really would appreciate it if you'd leave a 5-star review on Spotify or a review on Apple. It really just kind of helps to get the podcast out to other people. Don't forget to check out the social media pages. Share those memes. They are hilarious. Tag me in your Instagram, That Florida Feeling. I love that Nancy tags me and stuff. She has an amazing, amazing eye for photography. I share her stuff a lot. Don't forget to check it out. I enjoy interacting with you guys as fellow Florida lovers. I hope that you guys have a great week. Do not forget to check out Florida Men on Florida Man. drink your water, stay hydrated, and as always, guys, that is your daily dose of sunshine.